Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz composer and improviser Matthew Goodheart. He talked about his new 2021 CD with the Broken Ghost Consort called Presences, mixed suite for 5 performers and 9 instruments. He completed a Ph.D. at the University of California at Berkeley in 2013. His diverse creations range from large-scale microtonal compositions to open improvisations to immersive sound installations, all unified by the analytic techniques and performance methodologies that bring forth the unique and subtle acoustic properties of individual musical instruments. He's got a great story. Enjoy.
Hi, Joe. I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Hey, I'm good, man. Thanks for taking a minute out for the show.
No, it's great, and I really appreciate you taking the time, too. That means a lot.
You bet, man. So let's talk about Matthew Goodheart and the Broken Ghost Consort. Talk to me a little bit about this mixed suite for 5 performers, 9 instruments. You know, it's coming out on the tail end of a pandemic.
Yeah.
It's a unique time where you can't, we haven't been able to communicate with a live audience. Talk to me a little bit about this project and how you feel about it.
Well, I'm really happy with the project, I'll have to say, and I'm really proud it's coming out, and I'm grateful to Infrequent Seams for wanting to put it out. The project was recorded before COVID in, 2019, 2018. Now I'm already getting my years confused.
Me too, man.
We've been in this sort of timeless zone for the last 18 months, We rehearsed and recorded and toured the piece in Europe, in, I guess it was 2018, because that would have been 2019 when I was doing all the mixing and all that stuff. Sort of conceived of as this mix of pieces with these variety of ways getting the musicians to interact with the electronics, of expanding the work that I've been doing with transducer-activated instruments attached to live instruments while musicians are playing, and exploring what the possibilities of that are. So each piece sort of tracks a different way of the musicians interacting with each other and with the electronics, and sort of mapping the way different sound possibilities emerge in each of these different types of pieces. And it's sort of an arc and a narrative flowing over all 4 works.
Yeah, that was it. And, I know how this made me feel, but I'm curious how you want the listener that either downloads or buys this to feel about what you put out, what your artistic intent and all of that. How do you want them to feel?
That's an interesting question, because how one expects people to hear something, or the notion of authorial intent, as it were, is a big sort of sticky big question. I hope the music has a feeling of transcendence to it. It certainly does for me. That's why I pursued those sounds and those kinds of interactions, that there's this journey and exploration and finding beauty in things that types of sounds or interactions that maybe are familiar or unfamiliar to you, but when listened to in this way really draw you into a world that it may or may not be familiar to, and that it's engaging in that way and has that sense of losing ourselves in the sound and in the world. It's very different to hear it recorded than it is to see it live, because with the transducers attached to the different instruments, you see the interaction between people playing, and there are moments where the sound is coming, but no one on stage is doing any action. Like the beginning, for example, all of the sound, my voice is coming out of the piano. I'm just sitting there. So when it says sometimes that I could just sit here and do nothing, my voice is coming from the piano, and I'm sitting there and doing nothing except pressing the pedal down. So the album becomes this way of kind of translating that experience of what it might be like in the live setting, where the instruments have a sort of animation or identity that is involved with how the musicians play them, but also sort of activates autonomously on their own. And when you get into the world of recorded sound and, headphone or stereo listening, it's a different world. And so I found myself tweaking the sounds in certain ways that they would, during the mastering process, that they might have a little more close miking sounds to them, or emphasizing that in the mix, because that'll allow a certain relationship with the listener to the way the sound emerges. Sound of the voice at the very beginning of the piece, hopefully people can identify that it's a voice, but it has this sort of peculiar woody sound, woody resonance to it, that as the pedal starts lifting and the sound starts expanding, it sort of takes you from the world of someone talking to you into some other heightened realm. So it's those kinds of things, these interactions with the sounds, and as well as a listener's awareness of how those sounds might be being produced, or the associations they have as it's coming across their headphones or speakers. Those are the things I'm sure. Those are a element of what I'm hoping that the listener will be engaging in.
So I'm curious how all of this began for you. How did you get involved with music, improvised music, jazz? How did the seeds get in you?
Oh, the seeds go way back. There's the story my mother likes to tell, is I think I was 3 or 4. They brought our first piano into the house. I think within an hour of it being there, apparently I was sitting there and playing it, and I told my mom, come over and write this down. This is called The Wind, and I improvised something on the piano. So, who knows why people are constructed the way they're constructed, but there was something early on for me that playing an instrument just made sense, and there was some kind of exploration there that, neurophysically, psychologically, cognitively, as well as culturally or whatever, just drew me to that. And there was an early period of my life where I thought music would be secondary, and I was going to be a theater artist or an English professor or something. And around the age of 18 or 19, I realized it couldn't be any other way, that I had to dig as deeply into the world of music and all its complexities as I could. And it was a really humbling moment, especially the sort of music I'm interested in, which is, not always things that are going to be played on, popular music stations, or, back in the days of people are listening to radio over the air. It was this sort of humbling moment that I'm going to commit myself to a particular direction, meant learning how to play my instrument at a broad and deep level, or at least trying to, and sort of following the kinds of sounds and the way music can operate that seemed to draw me, or seemed to tell me that it needed to come into existence, and that was the way I was going to go. I just couldn't live any other way. I would have a very unhappy life, and something would feel missing and wrong. Yeah, it was this moment of sort of committing to that path. That's how it started. Improvisation, from day one was sort of always part of the way I intuitively was interested in, music, or felt like a good musical expression for me. I tend to think of improvisation and composition as musical domains rather than separate categories. Composition deals with the idea of sounds relating to each other over time. So those are the compositional elements of a piece of music. Whereas improvisation, is more oriented towards immediate responses. Just about all kinds of music that I think of have both of these dimensions to them. Something like jazz, the good players, and great players especially, definitely have compositional ideas of how their solo builds or relates over time. And even, music that's written down, especially something like Baroque music, involved a lot of improvisation from its players. But even something, you're playing some complex modernist work, piano, and giving a concert for it, and it's in a certain type of concert hall that has some kind of resonance, or there's a noise that erupts in the audience in the middle of the piece, you're still going to have some small improvisational moment there where you deal with your real moment, that moment in time. So these were sort of these different domains that were always in dialogue for me. Jazz, of course, became a natural affinity for me. My grandfather and I started taking jazz piano lessons at about the same time when I was around 12 or 13. And, it was something we certainly listened to in the house, along with lots of other kinds of music. As I became serious in my late teens, really, I realized that I needed to dig deeply into some of the traditional languages of jazz, into bebop, because those are ways that not only is that incredible and important music, I mean, just on its own, but it also, if you're looking at developing your musical languages, these are ways as a player that teach you about how to approach the instrument, how to think about harmony, and how to think about your relationship with scales and harmony, and get your hands over it, your body involved in it, and your ear mixed in with it. It became a very natural affinity for me. And sort of following that progression of learning about bebop and digging deeply into Charlie Parker and hard bop and sort of that history, it naturally led me to the types of musical expressions that came about in the late 50s into the early 60s that are, surrounded by the late John Coltrane and Cecil Taylor. And of course, these artists, Ornette Coleman, these artists, of course, have radically different approaches. That was a natural progression for me. And those kinds of music that emerged at that time and continued and developed from that time spoke to my other interests in sounds and other sort of innovative ways of approaching both the instrument and the structure of the music and the way a sound evolves over time. They became links to many other kinds of music for me as well.
So if you could get into a time machine and go back in time and see any jazz musician and talk to them when they get off stage, who would you go see?
Oh, boy. John Coltrane comes up immediately, especially that period in the mid-'60s. I can be really attracted to music that is in the process of changing and transforming. So he would definitely be one, Charlie Parker, I know, was a pretty difficult person from everything I've read, but definitely would be interested in chatting with them at some point. I was lucky enough to have some conversations with Cecil Taylor, and I got to work closely with Aliyah Smith, which I feel like I was able to live some of that feeling of if you could talk to someone, who would you want to talk to? And I have talked to him. Either, other musicians that are not directly jazz, Irvin Schulhoff, the Czech pianist and composer, would be another very interesting one for me to talk to. There's Stravinsky, Stockhausen, going way back, Heinrich Ignaz Bieber, one of the composers in the Baroque era, and Barbara Strozzi, another Baroque composer. I don't know, there's so many of them, I can't say that there's one. And I'm not even thinking of all of them. There's John Cage. I was lucky enough to have conversations with Pauline Oliveros. There's so many.
Yeah,
it's a huge question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So talk to me a little bit about, like you talked about Cecil Taylor and Aliyah Smith and some others. What did you learn from the elders that really helped you as a musician that resonates to this day?
Oh, that's great questions. From Cecil, I learned many things. I remember the first time I heard his music. Some other students, there was a group of us really committed jazz players that were all students at UC Berkeley at the time, which didn't have a jazz program. We were part of a club called UC Jazz. Aaron Stewart, this tremendous saxophone player, was playing, I think, one of the Cecil Taylor solo albums. Might have been For Olam, I can't remember. And I remember hearing it, and I realized that this artist had asked fundamental musical questions and had been able to, I want to say, both reimagine music from the ground up, but in a way that didn't deny the history that was behind it, that incorporated it, but incorporated it in a way that allowed us to hear anew. And that went to every level of the music, from the structure to the, aesthetic of the way notes would move from one cluster to another, or one gesture to another. And that it also pulled you into a way of listening that expanded the way you heard. You walked out from that thinking, wow, I've heard something new. I've never thought of the world in that way before. And now I see the world in a new and richer way. So it was, for Cecil, it's always sound, but it is also this particularly construction and those elements of digging deeply that way. With Wadada, Wadada certainly has, amazing structural ideas as well. But people often talk about the silence in Wadada's music, and that's certainly there. But for me, it was more the way he shaped each individual sound. It was in such detail and so sculpted and elegantly sculpted. There was no thing as just a note. Each note, each sound that came out of his instrument was this entire world. And so again, it's something that drew you into that world of close listening. It's in a very different genre. I grew up, my teacher was W.A. Matthew, who was a disciple of the Pandit Prannath, the great Indian singer. And so he used to take me to concerts listening to go hear Pandit Prannath. And it was incredible to be in these sort of living room concerts where you're just, 5 or 6 feet from this person who has spent their entire life, focused on this kind of music. And it was when Prannath was older and his voice wasn't as strong and wouldn't project across the room as much as it had when he was younger. But it had that property of pulling you in to this world, this sound world, which was, it made you hear more. The more you listened, the more you heard in it, and the more possibilities that you heard in it. So that's a couple of them, maybe 3. Does that answer your question? Or
yeah, absolutely it does. So every day you get to wake up, you get to create music. What do you look forward to the most? What's the greatest thing about being a professional musician?
Well, just to be involved with sound and music making every day. I'm lucky enough to be a college professor right now, so I do a lot of teaching. I've always loved teaching, and teaching has always been a part of my music. Teaching music and developing my own direction have all seemed to be interlinked in some way. But, for a long time I was a working musician, and that meant not only pursuing my own work, but also, playing jazz standards as the music that you're hired to play, church music, funerals, weddings, accompanying singers, all of the ways that, musicians have survived over the millennia as working people. And I realized that I even like music that I don't like, if that makes any sense. That even when I had to go play music that wasn't my taste, wasn't my favorite, there was still this joy in making those sounds and playing those sounds and having people hear it and enjoy it and engage with it. So that's sort of, I guess, that's the greatest pleasure in music. For me, I feel so fortunate that I'm able now to spend such an amount of time exploring the world that I think needs to be explored. But, just the daily life of a musician, though desperate in many ways and a struggle and complex, also at the center of it is this great pleasure and this important pleasure. And it's always incredible to see the way those things can mark important events in people's lives. Like I said, you play weddings and funerals and it sounds like, okay, it's a job, but there's also something very profound in that. You're dealing with people and families at these intense, important moments in their lives. And music and sound are this crucial element to that, and are these sort of very deep ways of participating in that.
You know, as we return to music, as the world starts getting back, what do you hope both the fans and the musicians realize about the importance of live music when we get back?
There's nothing like live music. There's nothing like people being in a room together and having someone who spent years of their life, devoted their life to creating these sounds and being in that presence and being in that this kind of incredible interchange that happens. I mean, I do have such a broad definition. I try to have a broad definition of music that can include lots of important experiences. And I think, you know, there are many profound experiences that can happen, you know, headphone listening and all sorts of other approaches. And I think mixed together, they're all important. But there is something just wonderful about and intense about the ritual of live music. I'm always surprised when I have students that have never been to a concert. You know, it doesn't matter what kind of concert, whether it's a folk music event or a jazz band or an orchestra or whatever. You know, that they've never experienced that, and that it's such a different way of listening, to listen to be in the presence of it happening in front of you. So I do hope people remember to go out and have that experience as well. That all of that can only enrich their lives.
Beautiful. So everyone has a perception of you, an idea of who they think you are. Your family, your friends, your fans, but you're the one living your life. Who do you think you are?
Oh boy, I have no idea. The older I get, the less I know sometimes. Who do I think I am? Well, I mean, I think, you know, we all contain multitudes. So, you know, part of me is the sort of the hermit that is dedicated to this particular, exploring a particular type of sound world and relationship, sonic relationships, as well as an artist who is exploring those, what it means to make music and to make sound for people, especially in relationship to instruments and technology, because instruments are a form of technology. You know, there's another part of me that is a teacher that wants to, you know, engage with students. One type of student who may be, you know, not interested in pursuing a career in music, but is interested and wants to learn more about it and can be exposed to, you know, I have many students tell me after taking my classes that, you know, wow, I never thought about music in that way before, that it could be that to people. So that's important, because I think that's, you know, that's important for all of us to experience. To me, that's part of education, in a broadly defined.
Beautiful.
And then there's also the one, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, you're good. Go ahead.
And then I was going to say, then there are the students that are interested in music, and especially those pursuing their own paths. And I want to help them find that. You know, certainly doesn't have to be any direction that I've pursued, but, you know, hopefully pursuing my own work in its depth can help them find their own languages and find their own paths and things they want to explore and make music that, you know, I've never thought of or considered before, you know.
Beautiful. Right on. Matthew, thank you for taking some time out to talk about your music and your life in music. I really appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you calling.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to another Neon Jazz interview. We give you a bit of insight into the finest players in California, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Matthew for his time, music, and story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino in the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.